Well, I'm sure you were intrigued by that film that we saw just a few minutes ago about the exponential nature of the internet. But there is another side of the picture which we also need to keep in mind. There are about 6 billion people on the planet, and of them, about 1 billion are children. Of these 1 billion children, about 750 million don't have adequate resources for a good education. 250 million do, but 750 million do not. Now, in this exponential technological change that we saw, what is going to happen to that 750 million children? I think that's a very central problem and a very central question that we need to address, and we need to address it now. Because those children, in another 10 years' time, those 750 million children will all have crossed the age of 18. If 750 million people cross the age of 18 without an adequate education, we would have a very troublesome world. So my talk is not about the distant future, it's about now. What do we have to do now? There are two kinds of problems that I wish to point out. The first kind is a problem of resources. Now that's easy to understand. There's not enough money. There is not enough money, and there is another peculiar problem. There are places on the planet where, for some reason or the other, you cannot build a good school. You just cannot. And then there are places on the planet, in every country, where, for some reason or the other, good teachers either cannot go or do not want to go. Now, this has always been the case. The question is, what do we do? The ironic part of this problem is that good teachers are absent in just those places on our planet where they are needed the most. Why does this happen? Because teachers are human beings. They like to have a good life for themselves. So where does a good teacher want to go? She wants to go to a good school in a big city. She doesn't want to go far away somewhere where there's nothing to eat and there's disease and so on and so forth. So the problem aggravates itself. And before I get into the main part of my lecture, I want to point out one more problem. Today, a lot of people access the internet. I'm sure everybody in this room accesses the internet. And we have been accessing the internet, as you saw in that film, from about 1992. Just throw your mind back to the time in 1993 or 94 when we were accessing the internet. It was on a desktop computer with a big monitor, usually in an office or, for richer people, at home. But it was a big machine. It was expensive. Today's access is only the size of a playing card, about that big, and you can access the internet. It's also much, much cheaper than it used to be. So what's going to happen in the next 10 years? Well, clearly, the devices are going to get smaller, they're going to get cheaper, and the interfaces are going to change. In 1995, if a person was accessing the internet, you could tell from far away that he was accessing the internet. You would say, oh, he's sitting on the computer, he's accessing the internet, he's doing email. Today, when you see a person with a mobile phone, you would say, either he is, if the mobile phone is in front of his face and not on his ear, you would say either he is texting, or he's checking his email, or he's playing a game. But 10 years from now, that device will be so small and so invisible that you may no longer be able to tell whether a person is accessing the internet or not. So, if I was standing here in 2021, you would not be able to tell whether I was speaking from my own mind or I was reading a web page somewhere. When that happens, all of education and all of educational assessment will have to change. All of it. What do we do as educators in that world which is just 10 years away? Well, let me take you back a long time ago, 12 years back to 1999. I was working in India at that time, and I used to work for a company that produced educational materials for creating software developers, very expensive courses. And just outside our office was this big sprawling slum. And I used to think, why should only rich children become computer programmers or software developers? What makes us think that poor children will not make equally good computer programmers? But the trouble is, how do you get a computer teacher to go and teach in that slum? Because she gets paid a lot for teaching in an expensive school. So I tried an experiment just to see what would happen. I put in a computer built like an ATM into the wall of a slum and turned it on. It was 3 feet off the ground, and I just left it there. And the children came immediately. They don't know any English. They've never seen a computer before. They don't know what the internet is. And people said, you know, they're going to break the computer, steal the parts, and sell it. But actually that didn't happen. About 8 hours later, we found that the children were surfing. And that started a whole long story. The press called the experiment the hole in the wall, because, you know, the computer was stuck inside a wall. When we saw the children surfing, people said, well, it's very simple. They must have been standing in front of the computer, and one of my rich students must have been passing by, saw the children, and showed them how to use the mouse. So I thought, yeah, that could happen. So I repeated the experiment, this time in a very far away, remote village in India, where the chances of a passing computer programmer was very little. And I saw the same thing happen. When I went back after 2 months, I saw children playing games on the computer. When they saw me, they said, we need a faster processor and a better mouse. So you know, I thought, how should they know this? And they said, well, this computer works in English, very difficult, so we had to teach ourselves English to use it. And as a teacher, I thought to myself, well, they've learned how to use the computer, but they're saying they've also learned English in order to use it. How is that? How does that happen? Here's a little glimpse of those years. This is the first day at the hole in the wall. 8-year-old on your right, teaching his student, 6 years old, on the left. in the deserts of Western India, so all across the length and breadth of India, I repeated this experiment in 23 different villages, selecting them because of their geographies and also because of their ethnic composition, the different kinds of children. And we observed that everywhere the same thing would happen. In 9 months, groups of children would teach themselves to use a computer and the internet to an extent which is equal to what the average office secretary can do. Meaning they can, use Windows, they can use Office, they can use email, they can use Facebook, they can use Twitter. All of that will happen in 9 months. What was also disconcerting as a teacher for me in those days was that this curve was the same as the curve in a school with a teacher. How was that happening? So we came to this conclusion that groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet on their own, very importantly, irrespective of who or where they were. What we had observed was universal. I published these conclusions, and in those days, in around 2003, it was considered quite a non-intuitive conclusion that they can do this on their own. Of course, today you have no problems in believing it because you've seen the generation that has grown up with the mobile phone. Nobody needs to teach a child how to use the mobile phone. They just do it on their own. But in those days, that was not so obvious. But to my mind, the immediate next question was, if they can do all of this, what else can they do on their own? In 2002, in the southern city of Hyderabad in India, it's a big city in South India, I came across a peculiar problem. There were thousands of little schools in Hyderabad which were attended by poor children because they wanted to learn English. Now the schools tried their best. They taught good grammar, they taught good spelling and punctuation, all of that, but there was one problem. No native English speaker will go and teach in a slum school in Hyderabad. So the teachers were all local, and the children copied the accent of the local teacher. The local language is a language called Telugu, which has a very strong influence on English pronunciation. So when the children came out of their courses and applied for a job, the employer would say, well, your English is very nice, your writing is good, but I can't understand what you're saying. So they wouldn't get a job. Now, how do we change their pronunciation? I bought a computer and gave it to one of these schools. Into that computer, I put in a piece of software which is, which is freely available now. It was in those days not freely available. It was speech to text. So when you speak into the computer, if it understood you, would type out what you're saying or follow your commands or whatever. So I told the children, speak into this computer. They spoke into the computer typed complete nonsense. So the children said it doesn't understand anything that we are saying. So I said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll leave this computer here for 2 months with an internet connection. You have to make yourself understood. The children said, how? And I said, well, I have no idea. And anyway, I'm going away. So I left them. I came back after 2 months. And I met a little boy outside the classroom. And I said to him in English, I said, how are you? And he said to me, fantastic. So I said, what have they been doing? So I went inside and I found out what they were doing. They had downloaded the Speaking Oxford Dictionary. When you when you take a word into the Speaking Oxford Dictionary, it speaks it out in a neutral BBC kind of accent. The children would copy that accent, correct each other, put it back into the speech to text, and check whether the right word was appearing or not. I was absolutely astonished because not just that they had changed their accent, but remember I had told them, I had given them no method, and they had invented the method. This was the first time that I had seen learners create a pedagogy. This conference is about new learning technology. But there is a big missing bit there, you know. What about new learning methods? That's not necessarily to do with technology. It's the technology of learning, not technology in learning. But these children had demonstrated it for me. Here's a glimpse of that experiment. So, you know, they would practice and they would correct each other. So at that point in 2002, I started to ask children to do all sorts of things. I said, well, can you remove a virus? Can you find out for me something or the other? And every time I would get a surprise. Around that time, I got a call from a very famous person, the late Sir Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer. He was alive at that time, and he used to live in Colombo. He called me and he said, look, I've been following your work, and I'm very interested in where you're headed. So I went to Colombo, and I met him. I told him about my work, and he said 2 things to me, which I still remember and which I think are quite important things. The first thing that he said was, a teacher that can be replaced by a machine should be. Okay, as you might imagine, a good teacher cannot, but a teacher who can be replaced by a computer should be replaced. The second thing he said was, when learners have interest, education happens. You don't have to do anything. So with these 2 things in mind, I started to experiment all over India, Africa, and Cambodia on learning. Here's a glimpse of those years. In the meanwhile, the computers had been around for about 9 months in the streets of Delhi. And the teachers from the local slum schools were saying some very interesting things. They said to me, you know, the children's English has improved dramatically. And the quality of their homework has become very different, very deep. So I thought to myself, well, how can just putting a computer on the street do that? I went to see what was happening and found the answer. In 6 months, those children had discovered Google. They were Googling their homework. So naturally, their English was excellent. Their answers were very deep. They were research papers. And I thought to myself, my God, what have I done? This is not learning. They're just copying things off the screen. But is it learning? Well, I got my answer, of all places, from Gateshead, England, 6 years later. That's the little bit of the story that I'll tell you now. At this point, I began to suspect that groups of children can achieve educational objectives on their own in the connected environment in which they are growing up. So anyway, up to this point, what we could figure out is, it's kind of obvious to everyone now, groups of children can learn all sorts of things by themselves. But can they actually take on basic education? In 2006, I came to Newcastle on a large research project on improving the quality of schooling in developing countries. In Newcastle, in a similar sort of meeting, people said to me, your first conclusions about the fact that children can learn to use computers, they can change their pronunciation, that sort of thing, very impressive, very nice. But what you're saying now is a bit too much. When you say that children can actually achieve their school educational objectives by themselves. Well, I thought, could be. Why don't we design an experiment to see if there are some things that children cannot teach themselves? The experiment was to be conducted in a village called Kali Kuppam in southern India. The research question, and you must listen to this very carefully because I don't have a slide on it. The research question was, the local language in Kali Kuppam is Tamil. The research question was, can 12-year-old Tamil-speaking children in an Indian village teach themselves the biotechnology of DNA replication in English from a street-side computer without any assistance? And I thought, what an experiment. I'll give them a test, they'll get a 0. I'll come back after some time, I'll give them another test, they'll get another 0. I'll go back to Newcastle and I'll say, we need teachers. So off I went to Kali Kuppam. Kuppam had been hit by the Asian tsunami in 2004. Its school was destroyed. Most of the adult male population was dead. I had given the children 2 hole-in-the-wall computers to play with, and they were very good at the computers. Into those computers, I downloaded material on biotechnology, DNA replication, straight out of the internet. I called 23 children, and I said to them, here's some material on something which is very, very important, very interesting. But unfortunately, everything is in English. The children went running to the computer, looked at the material, and they said, but it's full of diagrams and it's got chemical formulas and big words. How can we understand anything? So I said to them, well, I have no idea. And anyway, I'm going away now. So I left them with that material on the computer for 2 months. When I came back after 2 months, the children came in very quietly and said, we've understood nothing. So I thought, well, what did I expect? So I said to them, how many times did you see this before you concluded that you don't understand anything? So they said, we look at it every single day. So I said, you look at this every day for 2 months without understanding anything. So this little girl whose ribbon you can see, she was 12 at that time. So she raises her hand and she says to me in broken Tamil, she says, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. So, you know, when a child today says, I haven't understood, don't take him at face value because their own levels are very high. Okay? So I post-tested them and I got an educational impossibility, 0 to 30% in 2 months without supervision. Absolutely impossible, but they'd done it. But I still couldn't go back to Newcastle because 30% is a fail. How do I get them to pass the exam? I can't get a teacher there, but what I did find was a local accountant, a young girl who was the children's friend. So I called this girl and I said, listen, can you help them to get 20 marks more? And she said, absolutely not. She said, I didn't have science in school. I don't understand a word of what's written on those screens. So I said, well, you know, use the method of the grandmother. She says, what's that? I said, stand behind the children. Every time they do something, just say to them, fantastic. How did you do that? Wow, when I was your age, I was so stupid. I couldn't do anything. But this internet is fantastic. So anyway, so she did all of this for 2 months. The scores jumped to 50%. Same as a control school, a rich private control school in New Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher. The children of Kuppam had caught up. So now I went back to Newcastle with a very bold statement. Groups of children can learn almost anything on their own. That's the world we are in, ladies and gentlemen. That is going to be the key sentence of education in the years to come. How do we as educators tackle that? Well, just to give you a brief glimpse and then I'll stop. I went back to Newcastle and in the city of Gateshead, which is across the Tyne River, I went to a school and got a class of 32 10-year-old children. I started a new method now. The first thing you do is you tell the children, make yourselves into groups of 4. Why groups of 4? Because I had learned that from the hole in the wall. After the initial crowd is over, when you go on an afternoon to a hole in the wall computer, you find 3, 4 or 5 children standing there playing. So I took the number 4. So make yourselves into groups of 4. If you like, you can leave your group and join another group if you don't like your group. Every group of 4 can use 1 computer and not 4 computers. The hole in the wall again. It's the discussion which is key to the whole thing. As I said, you can change your group. You can talk as much as you like within your group. You can talk across groups. You can walk around. You can see what other groups are doing. And you can come back to your own group and say that I'm going to do that now. Okay? I explained to the children that these are all valid university research methods. So the children were very happy with all this. And then I gave them 6 GCSE questions. You know, GCSE is the final school examination in England. So these are questions which the children would have seen 6 years later because they're 10 years old. So I gave them 6 such questions. The best group did everything correctly in 20 minutes. The worst group in 45 minutes. The teachers came back and said, well, so what? What are you trying to prove? Because they've used Google, they've used Wikipedia, they've used AnswerBag, and so on and so forth. It's a big question. But I said to them, the government defines schooling as the ability to answer GCSE questions. If that is the definition of schooling, then these 10-year-olds have completed their schooling. So why don't we just let them go home? Well, I know that as teachers you will say, but what does that have to do with learning? They're answering the question. But remember, the government, every government says this is it. If you can answer the question, that's fine. All right, but the teacher said, but you know, you are not allowed to use Google and so on. So I said, okay, we'll try an experiment. 2 months later, I went back to the school. I gave the children sheets of paper. And I said, no talking, sit in rows and columns, no computers, no groups. Here are the 6 GCSE questions. Every child answered the questions correctly. Their average score was 76%. So the teachers said, this is absurd. You know what they're doing? They seem to remember the screens that they saw like photographs. And they're actually reproducing that from their brains, including pictures and things like that. So I said, well, good for them. I repeated the experiment 6 months later, then 1 year later, and now recently 2.5 years later, and they still remember all the answers. So, if they can answer GCSE questions, if they can remember the answer, what else is left? But teachers said, that's not learning. I asked them, what is learning? They said, we don't know. But that's not learning. So, okay, before I come to that, one more thing. If you use this groups of 4s method, we know that there is one missing piece. The children will get up to 30%. Remember Kuppam? They got up to 30. How do we get them the additional? I need a grandmother. So I wrote an article in the Guardian newspaper in the UK saying that if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband, and if you have a web camera, then can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? 200 people, 200 women applied. I know more British grandmothers than anyone else, I think. So they're actually not all grandmothers. There are some young women, there are men and so on, but they're mostly retired school teachers. And it's these 200 women in the last 3 years have done over 800 hours of instruction inside the slum schools of Hyderabad and elsewhere. They are called, in my university, they are called the Granny Cloud. So the Granny Cloud sits up there on the internet. Whenever there's a school in need, we can beam them over Skype and they go and help them. So with a combination of this self-organized learning environment and the Granny Cloud seems to be what will produce the result that you want. Here's a glimpse of that method. So you get the general idea of how this works. You can do it anywhere. You can do it in a classroom. You can do it out in the fields. You can do it just about anywhere. You need about 1 computer for every 4 children, and you need an internet connection. How far can it go? Well, I got invited to Turin, Italy, and to a school, and they said, well, let's try your method. Now, I speak only English. The children speak Italian. How do we communicate? Well, I wrote down a question in English on the screen, on the whiteboard. The children looked at it and said, well, we can't understand anything. So I said, come on, I mean, you have to, I don't know any Italian. So they typed in the English into Google Translate, got the Italian, fed it back into the Italian internet, and got the answer. So I started writing more and more questions, and this is what happened. So the question was, how did dinosaurs die out? "20 minutes later, they had the two main theories of dinosaur extinction. Next question, where is Calcutta? That was very simple for them. Then I got really ambitious. Who was Pythagoras and what did he do? Now these were 10-year-olds. This time there was silence for a while. Then one of them came up to me and said, "You've got the spelling wrong." Right angle triangles. When they got to Pythagoras' equation, they fed Pythagoras' equation back into Google. Google took them off into the Lorentz transformations and into Einstein's theory of relativity, and the children were going on. Why am I telling you this? Because the teachers at that point asked me something to which I don't have an answer. They said, "Shall we stop them?" I don't know, I don't have the answer. When do you stop a learner in an environment where they just keep going? That's the school you're going to head towards very shortly. Melbourne 2010, the questions get more and more difficult. Same results. Hong Kong, China 2011, and now here's the kind of questions that I'm doing nowadays. What happens after we die? Is GDP related to happiness? This one the Chinese children worked very hard on. After some time they came back and said, GDP, very easy to understand in economic terms, but happiness is really difficult. Can trees think? And the last one, which again is a very nice question for children, how does an iPad know where it is? Okay, so they said, GPS. So I said, come on, don't give me such a, one-word answer, GPS. What is GPS? Oh, it uses 3 satellites. They researched a little bit further. Why 3? 1 satellite would give you a circle, 2 satellites will give you a line, 3 satellites will give you a point. So I said, what's this about 3? How does it calculate it? They said, I think it's called trigonometry. So I said, would you like to know how to calculate it? And they said, yes. That's the crux of the method, because then you can tell the maths teacher, I've just opened the door. Now you go and teach your boring trigonometry, but they will sit and listen. Here's a glimpse of China. It looks very chaotic, but don't worry about it. So this is the crux of the method itself, groups of 4 to 6, 1 computer, unrestricted broadband, etc. All this is up on the internet, so I'm not going to read out the whole thing for you. But the last line is very important. As teachers, please pay attention to the last line. Gateshead, England, where a school has been, several schools have been using this now for several years. What they do is they use this method to start a topic. You convert a topic into a big, interesting question. Then you give that to the children, ask them to research it. When they come up with the answers, You leave them completely alone. When they come up with the answers, you build on the answers and you teach the topic. So what's the sum total then? I think there are three things that we need in the primary education curriculum of 10 years from now. Just three. Reading comprehension is probably the most important skill for a child today. They're going to spend all their lives reading screens, one screen or the other. They must have the ability to understand what they're reading. Information search, retrieval, and analysis. These children are in an ocean of information. It's impossible for us to even imagine what the size of the internet is. These children are floating, they're swimming in it like dolphins. We have to be able to tell them what to avoid, where to go, how to go, and what to do with the information that you get. And in order to do those things, you need a third one, which is what I'm working on right now. I don't have an idea of how to do it, but you must teach the children to have a rational system of belief. You know, all of us have that in our heads. When you hear something, you either believe it, or you say, I'm going to check, or you say, I will ask my friend, or you say, this cannot be true. We have a method of believing. We must teach that method to children at a very early age. It will protect them against the ocean of information that they're going to be confronted with. So what does it all mean? Well, I think what I've accidentally bumped into is a self-organizing system. You know, this is studied by physicists. A self-organizing system is a system that happens by itself. A storm, a tornado. You know, there's air, there is a bit of lightning and thunder and so on, and suddenly this whole spout appears and starts moving around. A tidal wave. These are all self-organizing systems. We are the biggest examples of a self-organizing system. Take some salt water, put some carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, thunder and lightning, 500 million years, and things start crawling out of it. That's self-organization. Self-organizing systems show emergent behavior, behavior that you did not expect would come. There is nothing in the caterpillar's little cocoon to say that a butterfly is going to come out of it. That's emergent phenomenon. I have a speculation. It's a pure speculation. I haven't proved it, I haven't worked on it. Education is a self-organizing system where learning is the emergent phenomenon, which is why when it happens, the teacher steps back in awe and says, wow. Okay? As the teacher, you cannot control. You can only observe. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.